Parliament, where the Minority Leader Haruna Idrisu wants Parliament to accept its share of responsibility for the current economic difficulties the country is facing. Haruna Idrisu says the crisis is due to the excessive borrowing by successive governments, particularly this government. Speaking during a co-leadership conference organized by the Ministry for Parliamentary Affairs, Haruna Idrisu argued that Parliament has been lax in its oversight responsibility and has just allowed almost loans through without stamping its authority.
Today, Ghana has an economic crisis, a crisis which is only similar to what pertained in the country in 1983. How did we get there? Excessive borrowing. Who ought to have checked government not to borrow or overborrow? The Parliament of Ghana. So Parliament must accept some blame and some responsibility in not keeping the executive to check. The consequences of excessive borrowing is now being felt by all of us when you hear an animal called a debt exchange initiative. It is affecting businesses, it's affecting public enterprises because they cannot run well, it's affecting the private sector. So Parliament's role as defender of the people's interests is lost. So how did we get there? How come that we couldn't anticipate it? Article 181, it is only Parliament that approves the terms and conditions of a loan. So if we borrowed and now we have exceeded 100% of GDP, how did it happen? And a typical example of the intense partisanship I spoke about, how could a Sino-Hydro loan get approval from Ghana's Parliament if Ghana's Parliament was to sit right? You have government arguing that Sino-Hydro, I'm doing battle of bauxite, when the road to the bauxite site is not even constructed. The Parliament of Ghana ought, in the defense of the people's interests, ought to have rejected that because the battle has failed. Sino-Hydro is due for payment. You don't have the bauxite. Parliament has reduced itself to a clearinghouse for executive embarrassment. When the executive brings something, then all of us, and I'm not talking about just an 8th or 7th Parliament, when you can talk of CNTI law, you can talk of STS law, they bring something to Parliament, we are not ready to scrutinize it and tell them in the face that this is not good enough for the country.
Well, his colleague, Majority Leader Osei Mensah-Bonsu, who's also the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, attributed the poor oversight from Parliament to weak committee structures. He proposes that some strong committees in the House should be chaired by the opposition party.
The Minority Leader has related to excessive borrowing. I think he and I have been discussing this. When a country is engaged in deficit financing, the chicken certainly will come home to roost at a point in time. And that's what we are seeing. That is what you're saying. Over the past 20, 25 years, every year, routinely, when we have budgets presented to us, we do know that we have to borrow to survive as a country. And that's what routinely, that's what we've been doing. And when you know that your resources are not able to match your appropriated amount, what will happen eventually? The edifice will collapse. And I agree with him. I have always been saying on the floor that we want to strengthen Parliament, but the Parliament is as strong as its committees make it. The structure of our committee system in Parliament is not helping us to grow our Parliament. When you have a system where all committees are headed by the members from the ruling party, certainly you have these dividends. You really lower the standards of Parliament, which is why since 1993, our Parliament has always been rated very lowly when it comes to the performance of our oversight responsibilities. In France, as I keep saying, the Finance Committee, like the Public Accounts Committee, is chaired by a member from the party that's not in control of government. When I asked, I was told that it is because the Finance Committee is a fulcrum of governance. and nothing should be hidden from the opposition party. So the chairman of the Finance Committee, just as the Public Accounts Committee, is headed by a member from a party that's not in control of government. We should be learning useful lessons from that.
Well, let's head to Parliament now and speak to Parliamentary Affairs correspondent Kweku Asante, who's joining us for more on this. Kweku, you've been engaging the NP for Subin Eugene Boakye. He and his group have returned to their resistance movement as they demand the removal of the embattled finance minister. Tell us more about that.
So, Blessed, some very strong words there being used by these majority MPs who are back to their demand that Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta must be dismissed, must lose his job. We know that when they made this request of the president, they met him. The president gave out some, as it were, options. He said that they should allow Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta to stay on until the appropriation, that is the budget, is completely dealt with, and also until government finished talks with the IMF. Tomorrow, the expectation is that Parliament will pass the appropriation budget. That will mean that the budget is out of the way. That is the first option the president gave them. The second layer, having to do with the IMF deal, is currently at the second stage because government has gotten a staff level agreement. And with this staff level agreement over the line, a board approval is all that is left for Ghana to be finally enrolled on an IMF program. So these NPP MPs are back to saying that they expect their President Kufuor, to keep to his side of the bargain. And if you listen to the interview that Eugene Boakye granted me, he used some very strong words. He said that why are NPP MPs and why are people watching on as this nonsense keeps going on? And he is not very enthused about the performance of the finance minister. He references the idea that the finance minister came to them begging that he needed approval for the e-levy. He needed approval for some revenue measures. They approved it for him last year, only for him to end up at the IMF, the same place he said he wasn't going. And so they think that the finance minister, it is time for him to go, and now they expect the president to keep up to his side of the bargain. The other side of the point is that since they made this position known, about 98 of them, the concerns have been that certain powerful elements within the party will want to see their back, will want to see them lose their party primaries, which is set to happen maybe next year, late next year. Eugene Boakye entry tells me that they are unfazed about those criticism, those threats of losing their seats, and that they are serving their people, and they believe that their people will always back them in return.
According to
the minister hand out that we have a finance minister who came to this house and met us the caucus and said, look, you know what? I won't do IMF. I will not do IMF. Well, I think it's very degrading for a country like ours. But I have two revenue streams. Help me make it a reality that will not make us go to IMF.
And you fought tooth and nail to give him that?
Yes, you were here. Two streams. One was e-levy. He wanted 1.5%. Haina Idrisu, the minority then wanted 1%. He said, 1.5. We gave him the 1.5. Look at how we fought for him to pass the e-levy. Bill is now an act. What happened? The projected revenues of 300 million. We only got 30 million, 10%. Yeah. The second revenue stream, property rates. Was that implemented in 2021? These are major policy failures that in any civilized democracy, Ken Ofori-Atta will not stand on his feet. Why are we entertaining such nonsense? Excuse my French. Why are we? What have we got against him as a person? You brought something to us. We are talking about those issues. And you forget about this, so you're going to insist somebody in their constituency just because you have failed.
It's not because you're frustrating them.
No, who's frustrating them? I stood. You saw us in the chamber.
Yeah, I did.
Fighting our NDC guys to pass the e-levy. You saw us there. So what haven't you done for Ken Ofori-Atta to succeed as a finance minister? And I said, posterity will judge us. If this thing is personal, posterity will judge. If this is about the soul of this party, posterity will judge.
Well, Kweku, based on this, are we hearing from the minority side as well, who earlier on urged the NPP side to join them past that votes of censure?
Yes, we've heard from Al-Hassan Tunini. I've been speaking to him. He says that the NPP MPs will pay for this. And I think they started something, they ought to have finished it. Leaving this hanging will mean that President Kufuor will now get the opportunity to come after them. We can listen to it.
Believe that many of them will suffer the consequences, especially during their primaries. Because one, the President Nana Akufo-Addo has shown since he became president, and even before that, when he was leader of the NPP, that he's an unforgiving person. And so you go against him and he fights you to the floor. And so they are going to contend with their, open aggression towards him in their internal party primaries. I can bet my last penny that they will. And then they will also be faced with the betrayal of the trust of their people who were expecting them to carry this fight through. And so I won't be surprised if many of them pay for that miscalculation and that wrong judgment call they made to boycott the motion of censure. But we on the minority side, we feel